Ex-husband humiliates his black ex-wife at a business lunch. One call destroys his father's billion-dollar company. What would you do if someone used a public business meeting to humiliate you after a painful divorce? Let us see how it unfolded. Consultants usually wait outside, Ethan Whitmore said, loud enough for every executive at the table to hear. Naomi Carter paused beside the private dining room service door, one hand resting on her leather briefcase, while winter sunlight flashed across crystal glasses and polished walnut like a warning nobody read yet. The chair assigned to her was smaller than the others, armless and slightly lower, positioned where servers passed with silver trays. No nameplate marked her place. Across the room, Richard Whitmore welcomed bankers, board members, and Vail Meridian representatives as though the billion-dollar rescue of his company were already complete. Naomi sat without protest, smoothing the cream sleeve of her suit over the faint scar in her palm. 6 years earlier, she would have smiled to make everyone comfortable. Now she watched the room carefully. The untouched blue folder, the nervous financial officer, the empty seat reserved for Adrian Vail. Then Ethan entered beside Vanessa Cole, his fiancée and former mistress, wearing the same practiced confidence he had carried through their divorce. Vanessa's oval diamond caught the chandelier light. Naomi recognized it. Ethan had promised that stone would belong to his wife when the Whitmore family decided she deserved it. His gaze found Naomi, moved to her chair, and sharpened with satisfaction. "Well," he said, "I didn't realize compliance consultants were invited to sit with principals." Two directors lowered their eyes. Another man hid a smile behind his water glass. Naomi placed her gloves beside her plate and looked back. She remembered another room, another polished table, and Ethan introducing her only as his wife after she had rewritten the contracts that saved his first major deal. He had always borrowed her intelligence in private, then erased her in public. Today, he believed he was repeating a familiar performance again. Richard gestured toward Naomi. Without warmth, "Ms. Carter is assisting with due diligence." Ethan pulled out Vanessa's chair near the head of the table. "Assisting," he repeated, savoring the word. "That sounds right." Soft laughter flickered and died. Naomi heard the insult, but she also heard fear beneath it clearly. Whitmore Global needed Vail Meridian's $1.4 billion investment to complete its North Star freight acquisition. Without that money, short-term loans would mature within weeks. Ethan assumed Adrian Vail would make the final decision over lunch. He did not know Adrian had delegated integrity approval to the woman seated beside the service door. A server reached for Naomi's champagne flute. "Water, please," she said. Her voice was calm, but beneath the table her thumb traced the scar left by the night Ethan called her unstable while using her credentials to hide payments through a shell company named Marrow Holdings. That secret remained. Ethan leaned back, confident the room belonged to him. He began discussing Naomi's difficult adjustment after the divorce, framing her career as a collection of minor consulting jobs. Vanessa offered a sympathetic smile. Naomi opened her briefcase and touched the blue folder containing 2 signatures, both hers, neither authorized ever. One signature dated from their marriage. The other had been used 3 weeks earlier to move $4 million through Marrow Holdings. Ethan thought he was humiliating an ex-wife. Naomi knew he was exposing the panic of a man who had realized the evidence had followed him into the room. "You still do this," Ethan said, lifting his glass as if the years between them were nothing more than an awkward pause. Naomi kept her eyes on the presentation screen, where Whitmore Global's projected revenue climbed in clean blue bars toward a future the company could not afford. The first course had been cleared, leaving behind the scent of lemon, butter, and expensive restraint. Around the table, bankers spoke in careful phrases about strategic liquidity and accelerated growth, never using the simpler word hanging over them all: rescue. Whitmore Global needed Vail Meridian's $1.4 billion investment before its short-term debt came due. Ethan believed the money was already his. He also believed Naomi was there to review forms and make recommendations someone more important could ignore. "Do what?" she asked. "Make ordinary business sound like a criminal investigation." His smile invited the table to remember his version of her. Vanessa touched his sleeve, the oval diamond on her finger catching Naomi's eye again. "Ethan," she murmured, performing kindness. "I'm sure Miss Carter is simply being thorough." "Miss Carter." The distance was deliberate. During Naomi's marriage, Vanessa had called her beautiful, admired her home, and asked for career advice over coffee. Months later, Naomi found hotel charges hidden inside Ethan's executive expenses and messages sent after midnight from the phone Vanessa claimed she used only for work. Naomi lifted her water glass. The cold crystal steadied her hand. Thoroughness becomes inconvenient when the records do not support the story, she said. Richard Whitmore glanced toward the company's chief financial officer, Martin Hale, who had barely touched his lunch. His napkin rested folded beside his plate, but a damp crescent had formed beneath his water glass from the number of times he had lifted it without drinking. Naomi noticed. She noticed everything now. Ethan leaned back. What story would that be? That this investment funds growth rather than covers existing exposure. A director near Richard shifted in his chair. Ethan laughed softly. You always loved dramatic language. And you always preferred vague language. The answer drew no laughter. Naomi turned one page in the blue folder. The sound was small, yet Martin's gaze dropped toward it immediately. That reaction mattered. He knew what was inside. Ethan looked at Naomi's cream suit, her simple watch, and the empty chair reserved for Adrian Vale. She could see him calculating her rank from visible symbols, the way his family had always done. No designer necklace. No famous man beside her. No reason, in his mind, to be afraid. What exactly is your position at Vale Meridian? He asked. Institutional risk, meaning compliance, among other things. He nodded as though satisfied. So you check whether the real decision-makers followed procedure. Naomi watched Richard's mouth tighten. He understood the insult had gone too far, but he did not correct his son. He never had. Instead, Richard began discussing North Star Freight, describing the acquisition as the crowning achievement of Ethan's leadership. The presentation advanced to a map of ports, rail lines, and shipping routes across West Africa. Entire communities appeared as colored zones beneath projected earnings. The regional approvals are secure, Ethan said. Our relationships are solid. Naomi's thumb rested on page 12 of her file. Which relationships? His eyes met hers. Government, local, commercial. And Marrow Holdings? Martin Hale's fork touched his plate with a faint metallic click. Richard stopped speaking. Vanessa looked from Naomi to Ethan, waiting for someone to explain why a name she had never heard had changed the temperature of the room. Ethan recovered first. Marrow was an outside advisor, with no employees, no office, and no listed services. Regional structures are complicated. Not this one. Naomi opened the folder fully and placed a certified bank record on the table. The document showed a $4 million transfer authorized 3 weeks earlier through credentials carrying her old married name. Ethan's expression remained composed, but his thumb stopped against his signet ring. Naomi saw the exact moment he understood. She was not searching for the secret anymore. She had already found the transaction that could bring his father's company down. The room did not become hostile when Naomi spoke. It became polite, which was far more dangerous. The presentation screen now showed a map of West Africa washed in corporate blue, with ports, rail corridors, and projected profit margins arranged in clean columns beside photographs of smiling workers. Ethan stood near the screen with one hand in his pocket, speaking about local partnerships as though every agreement had been born from goodwill. Richard nodded at measured intervals. Vanessa watched the investors instead of the numbers, gauging reactions the way she always had, with the communications. Director's instinct for weakness. Naomi remained near the service door, the certified transfer record resting beneath her fingertips. The $4 million payment carrying her stolen credentials had changed the room, but no one wanted to name what it meant. Graham Pike, one of Whitmore Global's longest-serving directors, adjusted his silver cuff links and offered Naomi a practice smile. Perhaps you can give us the diversity perspective on the regional concerns, he said. The phrase landed softly, wrapped in courtesy, but Naomi knew its purpose. They did not want her legal analysis. They wanted her reduced to a symbol, a black woman invited to comment on culture while the men at the table controlled the money. Ethan lowered his gaze to hide his satisfaction. He expected her to object and prove his old story about her being emotional. Naomi closed the financial appendix. I can give you the liability perspective, she said. Graham's smile thinned. Of course. Naomi looked toward the screen. Whitmore Global's internal assessment lists the relocation of nearly 18,000 residents as operational friction. The same report claims all local approvals were obtained without material inducement. Richard shifted in his chair. That language was drafted by outside consultants. Then your consultants failed to reconcile it with the payments. Ethan stepped forward. We already explained Merrow Holdings. You called it an advisor. That is what it was. Then identify one employee. Ethan's expression stayed smooth. Regional entities often rely on subcontractors. Name one subcontractor. The silence that followed was small but complete. Naomi could hear ice settling in a water glass across the table. Martin Hale, the chief financial officer, looked down at his plate. His right hand had begun folding and unfolding the edge of his napkin. Naomi noticed the movement and remembered seeing the same habit during the Santos investigation years earlier, when Martin had known more than he admitted. Graham cleared his throat. Are you suggesting improper payments? I am saying $12 million moved through a company with no operating history, no staff, no physical address, and beneficial ownership records tied to my identity without my consent. Vanessa's eyes moved sharply toward Ethan. Your identity? Naomi turned one page and placed a formation document beside the bank record. Her old married name appeared beneath a digital signature dated 7 years earlier. Merrow Holdings was created while I was married to Ethan. Ethan gave a short laugh, too quick and too loud. Naomi reviewed documents for me all the time. She had access. Access is not authorization. You knew how our business structures worked. I knew how you described them. Richard leaned toward the table. This is becoming personal. Naomi met his gaze. It became personal when your company used my passport number. The words settled over the room. Vanessa looked at Ethan again, but he refused to meet her eyes. Naomi felt the old ache rise beneath her ribs, not because she doubted herself, but because she finally saw how carefully they had prepared for this moment years ago. They had not simply hidden money behind her name. They had built the paperwork so that if anyone ever investigated, her expertise would make her look complicit. Ethan had once called her his greatest advantage. Now she understood what he had meant. She slid another document from the blue folder, this one showing 47 separate transactions connected to Merrow Holdings. At the bottom of the final page was an authentication code issued from Ethan's executive account 3 weeks earlier. Naomi placed it directly in front of him. His face did not collapse. It emptied. And in that instant, she knew the latest transfer had not been a clerical mistake. Ethan himself had reopened the system that still carried her stolen identity. Ethan did not deny the signature. He decided to discredit the woman who found it. He lifted the transfer record between 2 fingers, examined it as though it were an inconvenience, then placed it face down beside his plate. Around the table, the executives waited for an explanation. Instead, Ethan smiled. Naomi recognized that smile. It was the one he used whenever facts became dangerous and charm offered an easier escape. Since we are discussing context, he said, perhaps everyone should understand that Naomi and I were once married. No one appeared surprised, but several people shifted in their seats. Richard Whitmore remained silent, granting his son the room to continue. Ethan walked slowly toward the presentation screen. She was around during our early expansion, and she occasionally helped review documents. After the divorce, she struggled with the transition. Vanessa lowered her eyes with an expression of careful sympathy. Naomi could almost see the communication strategy forming between them. Ethan would not dispute the evidence yet. First, he would make the room question the person presenting it. Struggle? Naomi asked. Ethan spread his hands. You left corporate work. You took a few small consulting assignments. There is no shame in starting over. His tone was gentle enough to make the cruelty sound compassionate. Graham Pike looked down at his coffee. Martin Hale continued folding his napkin. Ethan turned toward the Vale Meridian attorneys. I only mention this because personal disappointment can influence professional judgment. Naomi has always had strong feelings about my family and this company. Naomi felt heat climb along the back of her neck, an old physical response to an old method. During their marriage, Ethan had described her questions as moods, her objections as insecurity, and her evidence as obsession. Now he was doing it before bankers, directors, and lawyers whose opinions could decide whether anyone believed her. Vanessa touched the oval diamond on her finger. Starting over at 30 must have been frightening, she said softly, especially after leaving such a demanding life. The sentence was polished, almost kind, but Naomi heard what sat beneath it. You lost. I replaced you. Ethan's gaze moved to Vanessa's ring, then back to Naomi. Some people are built to support success, he said. Others are built to create it. A faint laugh came from the far end of the table. Someone else concealed a smile behind a cup. Naomi looked at the white lilies, the crystal glasses, and the chair placed beside the service door. Every detail had been arranged to remind her of where Ethan believed she belonged. For 1 second, the room blurred into the kitchen of their former townhouse. She could smell spilled wine and hear him telling her she was making a scene while blood from her palm dotted the marble floor. Her fingers closed over the faint scar. Then she breathed once and returned to the present. Are you finished? She asked. Ethan's smile tightened. I am giving them context. No, Naomi said. You are teaching them how you respond when a woman knows more than you want her to know. The laughter vanished. Richard leaned forward. That is enough. Naomi turned toward him. I agree. She opened the blue folder again and removed a second certified page. Because the $4 million transfer is not the only problem. She placed the document beside Ethan's plate. It showed the authentication path used 3 weeks earlier, including an executive override, a device location, and a timestamp. The authorization had originated from Whitmore Global's private leadership floor at 11:47 p.m. Ethan glanced at the page, then toward his father. The look was brief, but Naomi caught it. So did Vanessa. Richard's face remained still, yet his hand tightened around the head of his cane. Naomi had expected Ethan's account to lead to the transfer. She had not expected the override code attached beneath it. That code belonged to only one person in the company, Richard Whitmore. Richard Whitmore's override code did not prove innocence or guilt. It proved that the lie reached the top floor. Naomi watched the founder's hand tighten around the silver head of his cane while the authentication record lay between them. The timestamp, device location, and executive override were too precise to dismiss as a clerical error. Still, Richard did not look at the document. He looked at her, as though the real offense was not the stolen identity, the hidden transfer, or the false signature, but the fact that she had brought them into daylight. You are making assumptions about internal controls you do not understand, he said. His voice remained low, polished by decades of meetings where other people learned to retreat. Naomi felt the old instinct to explain herself rise, then fade. She no longer needed permission to know what she knew. The override came from your credentials, she said. The transfer came from Ethan's account. My expired passport authenticated it. Those are not assumptions. Ethan shifted in his chair. You always love turning technical details into accusations. Technical details are what remain after people stop telling the truth. The room went still again. Vanessa's hand had left Ethan's sleeve. Her engagement ring rested against the tablecloth, no longer displayed, only present. Martin Hale stared at the record as though it might open beneath him. Naomi could hear the muted hum of traffic 20 floors below and the soft movement of servers waiting outside the door, uncertain whether lunch had ended. Richard leaned back. Suppose the code was used by an authorized deputy. Then produce the delegation. That information is privileged. Not from the investors whose money you are requesting. Ethan gave a quiet, humorless laugh. There it is. The performance. Naomi turned toward him. What performance? The wounded ex-wife pretending this is about governance. His words were deliberate, sharpened by the audience. You lost the marriage, Naomi. You lost your place here. Now you come back with a folder and expect everyone to confuse resentment with authority. A familiar pressure closed around her ribs. She saw the townhouse kitchen, the broken wine glass, the white marble floor, and Ethan's expression of exhausted superiority while she held a towel around her palm. He had told her she was unstable. He had told the attorneys she was vindictive. He had told their friends she could not accept that he had moved on. Every version of the story required Naomi to be emotional and Ethan to be reasonable. She looked down at the faint scar crossing her palm. Then she opened her hand completely. I did lose something, she said. I lost 6 years believing your family's silence meant I was safe. Richard's eyes narrowed. Ethan's face hardened. You signed the settlement. I signed away marital claims. I did not authorize future use of my identity. You benefited from this company. My work. benefited this company. That landed differently. Several directors looked toward Ethan. Naomi had reviewed contracts, exposed sanctions risks, and rebuilt failed presentations long before anyone at the table called him visionary. She had done it from home, without title or salary, while Richard praised his son's instincts. Ethan leaned closer. You cannot prove intent. Naomi reached into the blue folder and removed a black flash drive. She placed it beside the transfer record. Martin Hale stopped moving entirely. Richard's gaze dropped to the device for the first time. What is that? He asked. Naomi remembered the evidence room at Vale Meridian, the quiet headphones, and the sound of three men discussing how her credentials could create distance between Whitmore Global and a federal investigation. An archived compliance backup from the Santos project, she said. Ethan's color changed. Richard's grip loosened from his cane. Neither man asked what was on the drive. Their silence answered first. Naomi rested one finger beside it. The file contains the meeting where my name was chosen as the shield. Before Ethan learned to erase her in public, he had learned to borrow her brilliance in private. Years earlier, before Whitmore Global occupied a glass tower in Manhattan, the company ran major projects from a cramped office in Newark where the carpet smelled faintly of dust and overheated wiring. Ethan used to call Naomi after midnight, his voice stripped of confidence, asking her to explain contract language he pretended to understand in meetings. Back then, she was a rising compliance attorney, already trusted with anti-bribery reviews and government procurement cases that senior lawyers avoided. She could follow a suspicious payment through 6 entities without losing sight of the person who had authorized it. Ethan had admired that skill once. At least, she believed he had. He would sit cross-legged on the floor of their apartment while she marked his agreements in red ink. You're terrifying, he would say with a smile. Naomi would hand the pages back and answer, You're welcome. He promised that when he led the company, she would stand beside him. She did. Not understand then that beside him meant behind him, unseen. The first sacrifice appeared small. Richard Whitmore disliked how often Naomi traveled for work. He said a future executive needed a wife who could attend dinners, charity events, and weekends with investors. Ethan asked her to reduce her hours until he established himself. She agreed. Months later, he asked her to decline a promotion that required 6 months in London. We're building something together, he said. She believed him again. Eventually, Naomi left her firm. Her name disappeared from legal reports while her work quietly entered Ethan's presentations, negotiation strategies, and regulatory responses. She corrected errors at 2 in the morning, flagged sanctions risks before his legal department noticed them, and rebuilt a failed acquisition plan that Richard later praised as proof of Ethan's instincts. At the celebration dinner, Ethan squeezed her knee beneath the table, offering private gratitude while accepting public credit. Naomi had told herself love did not need an audience. Now, seated beside the service door, she understood that secrecy had never protected their marriage. It had trained Ethan to believe her work belonged to him. He stared at the black flash drive as if memory itself had become evidence. You copied confidential company material, he said. Naomi returned to the present, the scent of coffee and white lilies replacing the stale air of that Newark office. I recovered an archived system during a lawful due diligence review. Richard's voice hardened. That system was destroyed. The primary server was retired. The off-site recovery image was not. Martin Hale's face turned pale. He remembered the backup. Naomi could see it in the way his eyes moved toward the door. Ethan leaned closer. Even if a recording exists, you reviewed documents for me. You had access. You cannot separate yourself from the process now. The threat was almost identical to the one he had used during the divorce. If she exposed the shell companies, he would claim her expertise, prove participation. He still believed fear had preserved its authority over her. Naomi inserted the flash drive into. The laptop connected to the presentation screen. A folder appeared under the title Santos Project Recovery. Richard stopped breathing for one visible second. Ethan's confidence thinned. Naomi opened the audio directory, where one file carried the date Merrow Holdings had been created. She rested her finger above the trackpad. You are right about one thing, she said. I was present when this company was being built. Then she selected the recording that would reveal exactly who decided to build part of it on her stolen name. The recording did not begin with a confession. It began with Ethan laughing. The sound came through the dining room speakers with a faint hiss, thin and distant, as though the past had been trapped behind a wall and was only now finding a way out. Naomi sat still while the younger version of her ex-husband spoke from 7 years earlier. If Naomi's credentials stay attached to Marrow, compliance will assume she reviewed the structure. A second voice followed, belonging to Whitmore Global's former legal counsel. She has not authorized that. Ethan answered quickly. She reviews documents for me all the time. We can establish implied access. Then Richard Whitmore's voice entered, calm and impatient. Use the household authorization profile. If the project succeeds, no one examines it. If it fails, we have separation. Naomi had heard the recording before in Vale Meridian's evidence room, alone beneath fluorescent lights, yet the words still moved through her with the cold precision of winter air. Separation. That was what Richard had called her. Not family. Not his son's wife. A legal distance between the company and consequences. Across the table, Vanessa stared at Ethan as if the man beside her had become unfamiliar. Martin Hale closed his eyes. Graham Pike removed his glasses and placed them carefully on the table. Richard remained motionless, but the hand on his cane had gone white at the knuckles. Ethan recovered first. That file is incomplete, he said. Naomi let the silence answer him before she paused the recording. The metadata confirms the original sequence. You have no idea what was discussed before or after. Then, explain the sentence we just heard. His gaze hardened. You knew about Merrill. I knew you asked me to review a regional consulting agreement. You understood the structure. I understood the version you showed me. The distinction brought back the final months of their marriage with painful clarity. Naomi remembered Ethan placing papers beside her breakfast, asking for a quick signature because he was late. She remembered him praising her judgment when it served him, then calling her confused when she questioned missing attachments. By the time she discovered Vanessa and the shell companies, the two betrayals had already become one. He had not only replaced her in his personal life, he had used her professional identity to protect the empire that made replacing her possible. The divorce that followed was presented as civilized. A joint statement described mutual respect. Behind it, Whitmore attorneys froze accounts, warned friends against speaking to her, and produced documents bearing her electronic signature. Her own expertise became evidence against her. If she fought publicly, they would say she designed the system. If she stayed silent, Ethan would keep the company, the story, and the future. Richard offered a settlement tied to confidentiality. Naomi signed because she lacked the access to prove what she already knew. She left the townhouse with 2 suitcases, a box of legal books, and a resume with a 6-year gap. For months, she lived in Lena Brooks's guest room. Her collapse did not look dramatic. It looked like unopened mail, cold coffee, and standing outside office buildings too afraid to enter. Back in the dining room, Ethan pointed toward the speaker. You accepted the settlement. You agreed this was over. Naomi looked at him. I agreed the marriage was over. She restarted the audio. The former counsel's voice returned. If she ever challenges the filings, her background makes her look involved. Then Ethan said the sentence Naomi had spent years trying to prove existed. That is exactly why we use her. Vanessa slowly removed her hand from the table. Richard looked down. Ethan's face emptied. Naomi stopped the recording again and opened the file directory. Beneath the audio was a second folder she had not shown them yet. It contained the access logs from the week of the divorce, including the exact moment someone inside Whitmore Global deleted the records that could have cleared her name. Naomi did not rebuild her life under chandeliers. She rebuilt it beneath fluorescent lights that hummed through long winter evenings. After the divorce, her first job was reviewing vendor contracts for a nonprofit health network in Queens, 3 floors above a pharmacy where the radiator knocked so loudly that employees paused during conference calls. The salary was less than half what she had earned before marrying Ethan, and her office window faced a brick wall 12 feet away. On her first morning, Naomi arrived 40 minutes early, then sat in the stairwell because her hands would not stop trembling. She had spent 6 years being told that every professional instinct she possessed belonged to Ethan, and months being warned that anyone who hired her would inherit the Whitmore scandal. Her new supervisor did not ask about the divorce. He placed 600 pages of procurement records on her desk and told her to identify any irregularities within 3 weeks. Naomi finished in 9 days. She found duplicate vendors, falsified bids, and a kickback arrangement hidden inside routine maintenance invoices. Her name appeared alone on the final report. That small fact made her lock herself in the restroom and cry without sound. No one called her Mrs. Whitmore. No one praised Ethan for her work. No one asked her to make herself smaller before presenting the truth. Lena Brooks helped her renew the compliance certifications she had allowed to expire during the marriage. They studied at Naomi's narrow kitchen table beside legal pads, coffee cups, and containers of cheap takeout. Whenever Naomi said she could not remember enough, Lena slid another practice test toward her. "Do the next question," she would say. Naomi did. One question became a passing score. The score became a position at a forensic investigations firm. There, Naomi traced suspicious payments for hospitals, defense contractors, and infrastructure funds. She learned how corruption changed its clothes, but not its habits. The names differed. The routes differed. The silence around them always felt the same. 3 years after the divorce, she presented an investigation to Adrian Vale, founder of Vale Meridian Capital. Newspapers described him as a billionaire who bought distressed companies before anyone else recognized their value. But Naomi noticed only how carefully he read the footnotes. He questioned her for 2 hours about every assumption in her report. He never asked what Ethan had done to her. He asked how she knew the evidence was complete. "It is not complete," Naomi answered. "It is sufficient to show where the missing pieces were removed." Adrian studied the transaction map on the screen. "How did everyone else miss this?" "They measured how much money the company could make," she said. "I measured what it needed to hide." 6 weeks later, Vale Meridian hired her. Adrian did not rescue her. He gave her access, authority, and consequences if she was wrong. Naomi earned everything that followed. By the time Whitmore Global requested a $1.4 billion investment, she had become Vale Meridian's chief integrity officer, responsible for deciding whether a transaction's risks could be repaired or whether the business itself had been built around deception. She disclosed her marriage to Ethan, the settlement, and every potential conflict before accepting the assignment. She offered to step aside. The committee reviewed her record and voted unanimously for her to lead the investigation. Now, in the halcyon dining room, the access logs glowed on the screen. They showed that the evidence clearing Naomi had been deleted 48 hours before her divorce attorneys received the company files. The deletion came from Martin Hale's credentials, but the approval code belonged to Richard Whitmore. Then the service door opened. Samuel Reed, Vale Meridian's general counsel, entered carrying a sealed envelope. He walked past Richard, past Ethan, and stopped beside Naomi's smaller chair. "Ms. Carter," he said, "the committee has completed the delegation." Naomi broke the seal. Inside was the document granting her final authority over the billion-dollar investment. The envelope did not make Naomi powerful. It revealed that the power had been hers before anyone at the table noticed. She unfolded the delegation document slowly while Samuel Reed remained beside her chair, his expression neutral. The paper granted her final integrity authority over Vale Meridian's proposed $1.4 billion investment in Whitmore Global. Without her certification, no funds could be released. Without those funds, the North Star Freight acquisition would collapse, the bridge loans would come due, and the lenders would begin asking questions Richard Whitmore had spent months avoiding. Ethan stared at the document as though the words had rearranged themselves. "Final authority?" he asked. Samuel answered before Naomi could. "Ms. Carter is Chief Integrity Officer for Vale Meridian Capital." Vanessa's face changed first. The sympathy she had worn through lunch disappeared, replaced by the uneasy stillness of someone realizing she had mocked the one person holding the room's future. Richard leaned back, studying Naomi with a new calculation. "Mr. Vale and I negotiated this transaction directly." "Mr. Vale negotiated the financial terms," Samuel said. "He delegated integrity approval to Ms. Carter." Ethan gave a short laugh that carried no amusement. "You expect us to believe a former spouse with a personal grievance controls a billion-dollar deal?" Naomi placed the document beside the black flash drive. "I disclosed our marriage, the divorce settlement, and every potential conflict before due diligence began. And they still allowed this. They reviewed my work." The answer landed quietly. Ethan had spent years believing Naomi's credibility ended where his influence began. Now he was learning that her judgment had been tested in rooms he could not enter and trusted by people whose capital his family desperately needed. Richard turned toward Samuel. This is an obvious conflict. The investment committee voted unanimously, Samuel replied. Her familiarity with the company was considered relevant expertise, not disqualifying bias. Naomi watched Ethan absorb that distinction. For once, her history with him did not reduce her. It strengthened the case. Vanessa looked at the records spread across the table. So she decides whether the investment happens. No one answered immediately. The silence did. Ethan's gaze returned to Naomi. What do you want? The question was softer than anything he had said to her that afternoon. She remembered hearing a version of it during the divorce, when his attorneys asked what amount would make her disappear. Back then, he believed every wound had a price. The truth recorded accurately, she said. That is all. Richard's voice hardened. Truth is rarely that simple in business. Naomi turned toward the screen. Then let us simplify it. She opened the final transaction file. A map of payments appeared, linking Marrow Holdings to a British advisory company, then to a foundation in Geneva, and finally to a private trust controlled by the family of Paul Abra, the deputy minister responsible for approving Whitmore Global's port concession. The route had been designed to look fragmented. Naomi had spent weeks rebuilding it line by line. The latest $4 million transfer did not pay for consulting, she said. It reached Abra's trust 2 days before the permit was approved. Martin Hale lowered his head. Graham Pike removed his glasses. Vanessa looked toward Ethan, waiting for denial. He offered none. Richard tapped one finger against the table. That is circumstantial. Naomi opened a second file. This morning, Vale Meridian received court-authorized banking records from an unrelated sanctions investigation. The trust purchased a London property 48 hours after receiving the funds. Samuel placed a secure phone beside Naomi's folder. A green light appeared at the top of the screen, indicating the Vale Meridian Investment Committee was listening. Ethan saw it and went still. Richard's face lost its color. Naomi rested her hand beside the phone. She had not called anyone yet. But for the first time, every man at the table understood that she could. The green light on the secure phone changed the lunch from a negotiation into a decision. Naomi kept her hand beside the device while the Vale Meridian Investment Committee listened in silence. No one reached for water now. No one touched the plates cooling beneath the chandeliers. The private dining room that had seemed designed to diminish her had become painfully small for the secrets inside it. Richard Whitmore looked at Samuel Reed, then at Naomi. You have made your point, he said. We can address the compliance concerns privately. Naomi watched the founder's face. His voice still carried command, but the rhythm beneath it had changed. He was buying time. The concerns are already part of the transaction record, she said. Ethan stood near the screen, one hand braced against the back of his chair. You came here planning to embarrass us. Naomi glanced toward the lower chair beside the service door, the one Ethan had chosen for her before he knew her title. I came here to complete due diligence. In front of the board? The board signed the certifications. Graham Pike shifted uneasily. Richard's gaze sharpened. We can replace the regional intermediaries, reverse the transfer, and commission an independent review. Naomi turned to the payment map, still glowing on the wall. The route from Marrow Holdings to Paul Abra's family trust was not a single bad decision. It was the newest branch of a structure created 7 years earlier, protected through false signatures, deleted records, and internal approvals. An independent review cannot begin by pretending this started 3 weeks ago, she said. Ethan looked toward Martin Hale. Tell them the transfer was administrative. Martin remained silent. The CFO's silence carried more weight than any defense. Vanessa slowly rose from her chair. Ethan, did you know where the money was going? He did not answer her. Instead, he looked at Naomi. You understand what happens if Vale Meridian freezes the investment? Yes. North Star walks away. Possibly. Our bridge financing matures in 17 days. I know. The lenders will call the debt. Naomi held his gaze. They may. Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice as though intimacy could still control the conversation. Thousands of people work for this company. Richard seized the argument immediately. Families depend on us. Pension funds hold our stock. Vendors depend on our contracts. You are about to punish innocent people because of a dispute with my son. The words pressed against Naomi's conscience exactly where he intended. She thought of warehouse workers, drivers, analysts, and office staff who had never seen Marrow Holdings on a document. She thought of the communities reduced to operational friction in Whitmore's reports. She also knew what approval would mean. Vale Meridian's money would stabilize the company, complete the acquisition, and bury the evidence beneath a larger balance sheet. Richard would dismiss Martin, announce reforms, and continue. Ethan would call the lunch a misunderstanding. Naomi's own stolen identity would become another issue settled behind closed doors. She turned toward Samuel. "Has Northstar received the disclosure package?" "Not yet," he said. "The committee is waiting for your direction." Richard exhaled slowly. "Then there is still time to act responsibly." Naomi looked at the secure phone. Responsibility had been the word Ethan used whenever he wanted her to sacrifice something for him. Her job, her name, her silence. She touched the screen, but did not speak yet. "One question," she said. Ethan's face tightened. Naomi opened the authentication file and placed it before him. "Who authorized the $4 million transfer?" He glanced at Richard. Only once. It was enough. Richard's hand closed around his cane. Vanessa stepped away from Ethan. The committee heard the silence. Naomi pressed the call button, and the green light became a steady line. The call had not begun, yet Ethan already looked like a man listening to the end of something. The secure line glowed between Naomi's hand and the evidence spread across the walnut table. She could hear the faint electronic tone connecting them to Vale Meridian's investment committee, but before anyone spoke, Richard leaned forward. "Ms. Carter, you are not the only person with authority here." Naomi looked at him calmly. "At Whitmore Global, perhaps." Samuel Reed opened the financing agreement and turned it toward the board. Under Section 14, integrity certification belongs solely to the Chief Integrity Officer. The committee may review her decision, but it cannot release funds without her approval. Ethan stared at the document. Chief Integrity Officer? The words sounded foreign in his mouth. He had asked about Naomi's position earlier and dismissed her answer before she finished. Now the full title settled over the room. Vanessa's expression tightened as she remembered calling Naomi a consultant. Richard looked toward Samuel. "Mr. Vale never disclosed that she held unilateral authority. Mr. Vale disclosed that final integrity approval had been delegated," Samuel said. "Your counsel accepted the provision." One of Whitmore Global's attorneys lowered his gaze. They had accepted it because they believed approval was ceremonial. Richard had negotiated as though Vale Meridian's money was inevitable, signing disclosure obligations and lender notification clauses that became dangerous only if the company had lied. Naomi had read every line. Ethan had apparently read none. "You cannot let personal history decide this," he said. Naomi watched him move closer to the table, searching for the version of her he could still influence. "It did not," she replied. "The records did. You came here angry. I came here prepared. You waited until everyone was watching. You invited everyone to watch." The answer silenced him. Naomi remembered the smaller chair, the jokes about her failed career, and the sympathetic smile Vanessa had offered while Ethan reduced 6 years of rebuilding to a few consulting assignments. He had wanted an audience when he believed humiliation belonged to her. Now he objected because the same audience could see him clearly. Richard turned to the board. "The company can correct these issues without jeopardizing the transaction. We can suspend the executives involved and cooperate with an internal review." Martin Hale looked up at last. An internal review controlled by whom? It was the first time the CFO had spoken without being asked. Richard's face hardened. Martin swallowed, then continued. "The approval logs were deleted under executive instruction. I kept copies because I knew the deletion order was improper." Ethan looked at him with open disbelief. "You kept copies?" Martin nodded toward Naomi. "Her archive matches mine." The secret widened. Naomi had arrived with enough evidence to stop the investment, but Martin's admission connected the old deletion to the current transfer from inside the company. Samuel's phone vibrated. He read the message, then placed the screen beside Naomi. Northstar Freight had requested written confirmation that Whitmore Global's disclosures remained accurate. The response deadline was 30 minutes away. If Naomi certified the deal, the acquisition would proceed under false information. If she refused, Vale Meridian's lenders would receive immediate notice. Ethan read the message over her shoulder. "Naomi, listen to me. His voice had changed. No mockery. No polished amusement. We can fix this before it spreads. She looked at the man who had once told her the same thing about their marriage, moments before his lawyers erased her from it. The truth has already spread, she said. The committee chair's voice came through the speaker. Ms. Carter, we are ready for your determination. Naomi placed one hand on the authorization document. The call that could freeze the billion-dollar rescue was now fully connected, and every person in the room understood that only she could make it. The decision that could collapse Whitmore Global took Naomi less than 30 seconds to speak. The committee chair waited on the secure line while winter light faded across the private dining room, turning the glassware gray and the polished table almost black. Naomi looked at the documents before her, each page carrying a piece of the same truth. Her stolen identity, Richard's override code, Ethan's executive authorization, Martin's preserved records, and the payment trail leading to Paul Abra's family trust. Richard Whitmore stood at the head of the table, no longer pretending the lunch was a celebration. Think beyond yourself, he said. If this financing disappears, warehouses close. Drivers lose routes. Families lose income. Naomi heard the appeal beneath the warning. He was asking her to carry the consequences of decisions she had never made, just as Ethan had once asked her to carry the risk of documents she had never signed. She thought of the employees whose names did not appear in the evidence. She thought of the communities described as operational friction in Whitmore's reports. She thought of how easily powerful men placed innocent people between themselves and accountability. Ethan moved closer, his voice low. We can remove Marrow, replace the regional team, and repay the $4 million before anyone outside this room knows. Vanessa watched him from several feet away, her engagement ring now resting on the saucer beside his untouched coffee. Naomi looked at him. Repaying the money does not erase why it was sent. Then let us investigate it properly. You deleted the first investigation. His mouth tightened. Richard interrupted. The company can survive reform. It cannot survive public panic. Naomi rested her fingers beside the secure phone. That was the final choice he offered her. Protect the appearance of stability or protect the truth beneath it. Samuel Reed stood silently at her side, making no attempt to guide her. Adrian Vale was not on the line to rescue her, command her, or absorb the responsibility. The authority belonged to Naomi because she had earned the trust required to carry it. She drew one measured breath. This is Naomi Carter, she said. Based on verified evidence of identity fraud, material non-disclosure, document destruction, and suspected foreign bribery, I am withholding integrity certification for the Whitmore Global transaction. Ethan closed his eyes. Richard's shoulders lowered by less than an inch. Naomi continued. Activate Section 14. Suspend the proposed $1.4 billion investment and terminate exclusivity for the purpose of regulatory cooperation. The committee chair replied, confirmed. Notify all participating lenders that the company's disclosure certifications are disputed. Preserve the complete data room and all executive communications. Send the forensic package to Federal Counsel and the Department of Justice liaison. Richard stepped forward. Naomi, stop. She did not raise her voice. Issue whistleblower protections for Martin, Hale, and any employee who cooperates. Martin's eyes lifted toward her, relief and fear moving across his face at once. The chair asked, do you authorize immediate notice to Northstar Freight? Naomi looked at the acquisition map still glowing on the screen, the deal Richard had treated as proof that his company could outrun its past. Yes. The call ended with a soft electronic click. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then phones began vibrating across the table. Northstar suspended its acquisition vote. 2 lenders demanded emergency disclosure calls. Whitmore Global's outside counsel ordered preservation of executive records. A financial news alert reported that Vale Meridian had frozen its investment over undisclosed compliance concerns. Richard gripped the back of his chair. You destroyed this company. Naomi closed the blue folder. No, she said. I removed the money that was hiding what you had already done. Ethan's phone rang again, and this time the caller identification showed the chairman of the Whitmore board. By the time Naomi reached the elevator, Whitmore Global had already begun calling its collapse a misunderstanding. Behind the closed dining room doors, Richard's voice rose and fell through layers of polished restraint while attorneys demanded documents, Directors requested emergency access, and phones continued vibrating across the walnut table. Ethan followed Naomi into the hallway with his tie loosened and his confidence stripped down to something smaller, something almost honest. Naomi. She stopped beneath the brass light beside the elevators, but did not turn immediately. In the dark mirror across from her, she could see him standing several feet behind, no longer framed by his father's boardroom, his fiancée, or the company name he wore like armor. "You planned this," he said. Naomi watched the elevator numbers descend from the 27th floor. "No, you spent years collecting evidence. I spent years clearing my name. You knew one call would destroy everything my father built." She turned then. Ethan's face carried none of the practiced amusement he had worn at lunch. The man who had mocked her chair, her career, and her life after divorce now looked as though he had only just realized she had continued existing beyond him. "Your father built a company that depended on silence," Naomi said. "The call only ended mine." Ethan glanced toward the dining room doors. Through the narrow opening, Vanessa stood beside the table, her engagement ring still resting on a saucer. Richard was speaking to the board chairman while Martin Hale handed records to Samuel Reed. Nothing in that room belonged to Ethan anymore, not even the version of events he had prepared. "You could have warned me," he said. Naomi felt the old scar in her palm tighten around the handle of her briefcase. "I did warn you. In our kitchen, in mediation, through my attorney. Every time you called me unstable, bitter, or confused. That was 6 years ago. The transfer was 3 weeks ago." He looked away. The elevator reached the 23rd floor. "My father made those decisions. You used my credentials. I was protecting the company. You were protecting your position inside it." The words did not need force. Truth had already done the work. Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice. "What happens now?" Naomi considered the question. Federal counsel would review the payment trail. The board would likely suspend Ethan and remove Richard. Lenders would demand restructuring. Northstar would walk away. Some divisions of Whitmore Global might survive under independent leadership. Others would be sold. Thousands of employees would need protection from the people who had used them as an excuse to avoid accountability. "What happens next depends on the evidence," she said, "and on who decides to tell the truth before being forced." Ethan's expression tightened. "Are you really going to help restructure the company after what they did to you?" The elevator doors opened. Adrian Vale stood inside, holding a tablet beneath one arm. He did not step forward to rescue her or speak for her. He simply waited, leaving the choice where it belonged. "The committee is assembled upstairs," he said. "They want your recommendations for protecting employees and separating viable operations from the investigation." Naomi stepped into the elevator. Ethan stared at her. "So you destroy us, then save what is left." Naomi pressed the button for the executive floor. "I stopped the people who were destroying it." The doors began to close. Ethan looked suddenly younger, almost like the man who once sat on their apartment floor asking her to explain contracts he later claimed as his own. "Was any of it real?" he asked. Naomi held his gaze through the narrowing space. "My love was." The doors closed before he could answer. As the elevator rose, Naomi looked at her reflection in the mirrored wall. The cream suit, the steady eyes, the faint scar across her palm all belonged to a woman Ethan had believed he erased. Upstairs, investors were waiting for Naomi Carter, not Ethan Whitmore's ex-wife, not Richard Whitmore's liability, and not the woman seated beside the service door. The call had not destroyed a billion-dollar company. It had removed the lie holding it upright, and for the first time, Naomi's name belonged only to her.